Here we go. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the OWASP Netherlands chapter meeting of February 2022. We have three interesting talks today, and they're all centered around the Log4j news that appeared in December last year. Welcome, everybody. We will start first with a short introduction by Martin Knoploch about our chapter and OWASP. Martin.
Hi, welcome to our chapter meeting in February. So first thing from the board, we had our first public board meeting in January where we elected the new officers for the year 2022. So there are three members at large. It is Tubin, Bill and myself. And then we have our elected officers. That will be the secretary, it's Avi Douglas from Israel. We have our treasurer, that's known to the Dutch community, Clinton Carter, who is currently residing in Belgium. And we have our chair and vice chair. So the vice chair is Brent Ongo, based in UK. And our chair, I'm very excited, first female chair of OWASP board is Vandana from India. So I think that's a big gain. She is incredible what all she is doing, and the level of involvement. I just cannot come enough praise to Vandana, and I'm very happy to have her as a board member. For myself, I'm a member at large. So this is now official per the first board meeting we had in January. There are two conferences coming up. So one is a lower conference. Last year, if you recall, the OWASP NL Day couldn't take place, but it is postponed to the March 31st for training day and April 1st, no joke, for the conference day. That said, there's also the upcoming virtual conference. It's not ready to register either of those yet. The virtual conference will be June 6th to 10th. So the AppSec, unfortunately, not in-person conference we scheduled for Ireland. We couldn't go through because we didn't know how it would turn out with the COVID in Ireland. So the financial risk was just too big for us. So it will be a virtual conference again in the first half of the year, and then we have an in-person conference then in the US. That said, in between, in July, there will be May Contain Hackers, MCH, in the Netherlands, the MCH 2022. And of course, we will try to build an OWASP village there. So stay tuned on your Slack and email. So I will talk more about that later. So now first, the updates from Irfan. Irfan, please stay and I wish you all a lot of pleasure with the other three talks. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, Martin. Good evening, everyone. I'm very pleased to announce to you that I think last meetup that we had in January, I gave you guys an update that a few thought leaders on AppSec and security and DevOps came together in the Netherlands to discuss on ideas and how to contribute, to the community as OWASP. So we had a closing workshop this week, Monday on Valentine's Day. And as part of that, the closing workshop, basically there are two outputs. One is they want to continue with this session on a periodic basis. So let's say every 3 months, 4 months, these AppSec thought leaders, they will come together to discuss new ideas, to share ideas using OWASP as a platform. So my call to you would be, if you know AppSec thought leaders that would like to participate in that sort of roundtable conversation, please reach out to me. We'll be happy to plan them and add them to that conversation. That's one side of the output. The second side of the output is we got 3 ideas. Of course, many ideas were discussed, but 3 ideas where people and companies have committed to execute on those ideas as part of OWASP. So I'm going to mention very shortly these 3 ideas. One is set up guidance framework on how to roll out and implement a security champions program within your organization. And it's gonna be, tackled in different dimensions, not just the champion as a human being, but, collaboration, tooling, platform, all those things. The second idea that got traction, which we got an owner as well to drive it, is to see whether we can build tooling and processes around to consolidate all sort of security metrics that DevOps teams are generating and using, and AppSec teams are using. So one pay class of reporting So we're going to work on that sort of idea as well. We have a lead for that one. And the last one is to keep track of what sort of software goes to production. So call it a software bill of materials. What sort of project can we execute from a OWASP perspective to make that happen as well? And for today's talk on Log4j, that's going to be extremely relevant. I'm very pleased that out of that conversation, 3 concrete projects came out that will be driven. And I'm going to hand it back now to the speakers so they can take it forward. I wish all of them good luck with the talk today, and you guys enjoy, I would say.
Good evening, everyone. So Anna and I am going to have a little talk about how we experienced Log4j. But let's first start with introducing ourselves. Could you go to the next slide, Anna? So, short introduction. My name is Rick de Braker. I'm a software developer. I've been doing that for the last 12 years. Currently, I'm working at a consultancy company called Quinto, and on behalf of them, I have been working at ABN AMRO Bank for the last 1.5 years. Previously, I held different positions at various other banks and also in healthcare world. Mostly as a Java developer, sometimes a little bit of Scala. So Anna, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you very much, Rick. My name is Anna Rudenko. I'm product owner in the same team as Rick at ABN AMRO. Previously, I was living in the UK and I was running my own company, a consultancy company. And before that, I was doing a PhD degree in cognitive linguistics. Thank you.
Okay, can you go to the next slide and let's start. So basically we will tell a little story about how we experience Log4j at our team. So our team develops a large number of backend APIs for the ABN AMRO mobile banking app. And this crisis hit us pretty hard. So it's nice that we were able to tell our story here. So let's start. So let's go back to the 10th of December at around 8:30 a.m. when I woke up. I received a nice email from one of my colleagues at Quinto, and he was mentioning something about some security incident in a logging framework. No CVE number was assigned yet. And yeah, well, me in the early morning, I was not fully aware yet of what the impact of that would be. So I just started my day normally from home. Well, somewhere along the morning, I saw some chatter among the developers of different teams within our organization. And yeah, they were also talking about this thing. Okay, so maybe we should also have a little look at this. So I already slowly started investigating and see if we were also impacted. And then somewhere at the end of the morning came an announcement from our internal security team that we have to upgrade Log4j. They explained a little bit about what the impact of this vulnerability was. And basically it was a call to action. It was somewhere at the end of the morning. At that moment, not everybody directly understood what was going on. In the afternoon, we saw that we started to going to work and started to investigate what the impact for their team would be. But it was mostly among developers, and the message did not make as much impact as it should be, maybe. Also, we noticed that there was a lot of chaotic communication going on. People were asking themselves, are we impacted? Do we have the affected versions in our system? Also, a lot of miscommunication, especially about the Log4j 1 version. So yeah, it was a lot of chaos, but it was clear that we had to do something. Then, well, finally in the evening, I think all layers of the organization, and you can imagine a bank is quite a large organization, and it can take a while before everyone gets notified by this. So in the evening, everybody was aware, and we had some meetings with our managers, and it was quite clear that this from now on has the highest priority, and we have to fix this. That was somewhere at 8 in the evening, and from that moment, it was basically crisis mode on for us. So we have backend APIs. They are all written in Java, and they were using Log4j version 2.9, at least most of them. And so very optimistically, we started upgrading to Log4j 2.15. At that moment, it was the version to go for, the most secure one. For us, that we started with the internet-facing APIs at first, because they would be would have the highest risk of being compromised. So that's where we started. Directly already, we faced a lot of issues. We were not the only team, of course, who started working on this. So our pipelines were incredibly slow. Our Jenkins machines basically exploded. Some of these APIs also we did not work on for some time, and we had some permission issues. Not every member of the team could work on every API. That took us some time to solve, especially because we were dependent on some external teams also to solve these problems for us. And of these external teams, not everybody was aware yet what was going on. So somewhere in the middle of the night, we couldn't reach all the people we...
Rick, you want to mute suddenly?
Sorry for that. So yeah, basically we did what we could, and around 5:30 in the morning, I went to sleep. But at that same time, half of our team was in India at that moment because of the holidays that were approaching. So they were in a different time zone, and at that moment they didn't know yet what was going on, but they already received a lot of messages, and they could nicely work. Continue the work on Saturday morning. So somewhere in the morning we had upgraded all our important applications, and then we discovered way too late that Log4j 2.15 made our logs disappear. So at that moment we had no idea why, but soon it was discovered that other teams were also impacted by this, and someone quickly discovered that the latest working version was 2.12.1, and that happens to be one of the latest versions supporting Java 7. And our Java 7 to 8 migration was a few years ago, and we could imagine at that time that maybe some weird configuration was left on our application servers that prevented us from going higher than that. But yeah, we didn't bother to look into it that much that moment because we really wanted to get fixed to production as soon as possible. So yeah, we decided to revert to that version and apply a workaround that is mentioned in the meme on the right side, and that should, for now at least, make our applications reasonably secure. So we deployed at the test environments, and on Monday and Tuesday we released it to acceptance and production. The reason for us that it takes so long is that because releases on our side, they are a bit slow. We are also dependent on an external team for this, and it can take up to an hour for a release to complete. And we had to go through all applications twice, first 2.15, then 2.12, and yeah, you can imagine that that will take a while. So when that was done, we were at least in a reasonably secure state, but there was still a lot of work left actually. We had a lot of components that were not directly internet facing, but of course still had to be fixed. So we went through the same process for those components also. And then, to everyone's surprise, some new vulnerabilities appeared in the days after that. And yeah, that meant that we had to go through everything again. So our applications that were running on-premise, we upgraded to 2.12.2, and some of our cloud applications, we also have those, we upgraded to 2.16.0. So yeah, the process itself, it's quite boring. The fix is simple. It's very repetitive, and yeah, everybody was a bit bummed that we had to do it all over again. And after some time, again, since some new CVs, vulnerabilities appeared again. So we upgraded to 2.17.1. At that moment, we found out what the problem was with our web service, why they couldn't run the latest Log4j versions. It appeared to be some strange configuration that, that we could quickly remove, luckily. So we could upgrade all the applications to the latest version. Also, just to be sure, we applied a patch to our application service to avoid future problems. So that in total took us around 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks, something like that. And well, as you can see here, it was in total we had to update 41 applications. We had to do each of them at least 3 times on multiple environments. Since some of those applications haven't been altered for a little while, we also had to be a bit careful with testing because the bank still needs to be running. So that resulted in more than 30 releases, over 200 pull requests, and many hours of work. And yeah, basically after that, now we are in a secure state. We are pretty sure of that, and then you're going to talk about or going to reflect on this whole crisis and see what we can learn from it. So first question that at least I ask myself, can this happen again? Well, for me, the answer is clearly yes. These kind of crisis vulnerabilities of this scale, it doesn't happen that often, but yeah, we have a few risks, a lot of legacy applications that using all dependencies, and if we don't do anything about that, we can just wait until the next crisis appear. So we have to come up with some ways to be better prepared next time. One of those things, of course, is to come up with regular checks of all applications that we own to indicate possible security issues. In the past, we only did that when we were making changes, but that's something we should do way more often. Also, we should have a mindset of that we regularly spend time on refactoring and general maintenance of our software. And last but not least, we need to take control of our deployment process so that we can move much faster to our production environment. Some of you might wonder, but all of this is very logical. Why don't you do this already? It's very simple. Sometimes you just need a good crisis to shake things up, especially in a large organization. Change can be hard because these kind of things also require some kind of cultural change. And so this does not only apply to our team, but there maybe 100 teams in the organization that will reflect on this, and hopefully next time when something like this happens again, we are much better prepared and can solve this much faster. So now I would like to give the word to Anna.
Yes, thank you, Rick. I can say for sure that 2021 was very hard for all of us, but Log4j was the grand finale for everyone who is involved in software development. And just like the pandemic we're living through, this Log4j crisis sped up all the processes that were slowly brewing and also revealed the pain points in the current state of things. In a usual BAU situation, everyone who I ever speak with, and I have a lot of meetings due to the nature of my work, are very nice, helpful, and polite. But in a stressful situation, you also meet the not so polished side of people, which in itself makes the crisis like this even worse, as harsh behavior spreads like a virus. And I remember we worked all night on Friday. Then after a couple of hours of sleep, got back to the laptop, worked on Saturday in the same fashion, and then again on Sunday. And after that one additional work week squeezed inside one weekend, we got back to business again on Monday morning, way before the usual Dutch working hours. And as usually our work involves a lot of collaboration with many other teams, like I imagine in all big organizations, the soft skills that everyone is talking about these days become really crucial. Looking back at that experience, there were things happening that helped us go on. But at the same time, there were things that made the frustration grow. And a lot of it was based on the soft skills. When a person is calling you on a Sunday night, telling you that your team missed the deadline you knew nothing about, you think there's some neurological event happened. But when the person starts to shout at you, and then like just one of the sopranos gives you 4 hours to do the thing, and after some time you find out that the deadline was actually not from this person, but from someone else entirely, you know that something is totally wrong. And you have the same feeling when a lady who's responsible to know what's going on, because kind of the whole internet knows, tells you that kind of her team can only pick this up on Monday, and she's not the person who usually works during the weekend. And when you start explaining the whole gravity of the situation, the lady is shocked by how much of a workaholic you are, and to avoid further negotiation, just hangs up. But at the same time, it also happens that people who are absolutely unaware of the whole nightmare that's going on, but they show understanding and willingness to roll up their sleeves to help, even when you disturb them on a Saturday morning run or during a brunch with their friends on the weekend. And this is what helps you in a situation like this, and it helps a lot. Same as when the team can make patching fun at 3 o'clock in the morning, still making jokes and laughing all together, you know you are in the right place. And I think it's important to understand that it's not only about whether some people, their words or their tone of their voice, whether they make you feel good or bad. I'm sure that the development work itself is dependent on this. Good communication is the wind in your sails, while poor communication is an iceberg that you will hit upon. And you know the rest of the story. And when we say communication, we sometimes think of it only as being verbal and non-verbal, how you are listened to, spoken to, looked at. But in reality, we should also think of communication as documentation in its written form. And in a crisis like that, the lack of focused, constructive, and coordinated communication from all parties involved, and the absence of coherent and updated documentation may be regarded as another vulnerability, and it needs to be patched. Of course, it's hard to keep calm when we are under a lot of pressure and when there's lack of sleep involved, but cultivating the soft skills in an organization of any scale is paramount for honing the culture of creativity and ability to go through thick and thin together and not to give up. I agree with Rick that it's only a matter of time that a similar thing strikes again. But all of us involved in software development can face it with armor, having empathy, social skills, and the right attitude at our best to live through another crisis, but in a healthier way. For our team, Log4j became an epic, but not only in the Scrum sense, but also in our lives. It will be the topic will we remember for a very long time. It's our new benchmark. And we all can say that it was beautiful to be part of, though it was chaotic and frustrating and extremely tiring, but it was at the same time a true team building experience. It hits home so much that our team developed a cocktail named Log4jita. It's a bit sour, but mostly sweet with a candy bug inside. You don't waste a good crisis. You learn from it and celebrate after. Thank you. And if you have any questions or feedback, you're welcome.
All right, thank you, Anna. Of course, there's a slight delay. Oh, wait a second. Between the YouTube channel and the rest, so apparently we're now hearing there's room for questions. Everybody, if you have any questions for Anna or Rick regarding their presentation, just type them in the chat and I will relay them to them. And otherwise, we'll have a short break before the next speaker will start, and that is Dan Cornell on the long-term impact of Log4j. Please stay tuned.
I guess we are all on mute now, or we are not streamed.
All right, everybody, welcome back. And it's time for the second talk of this evening, this time by Daniel Cornell, about the long-term impact of Log4j. Dan, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And thank you to Rick and Anna for your presentation. I think you did a really great job of capturing the kind of chaos and the workload associated with it. I was fortunate enough to be close enough to see what was going on and think about it, but didn't actually have to participate directly in the remediation efforts. And so tonight, for y'all, I want to talk about a couple of things that I think will be, now that we're through the initial remediation for these Log4j vulnerabilities, I want to talk about what I think will be some of the medium and longer term impacts of this. By way of background, I'm a software developer by background. I've been involved with OWASP for a long time. I was one of the original members of the Global Membership Committee a long time ago, helped run the San Antonio chapter for a long time. We need to have a meeting, I think, to get the chapter turned back on. Work-wise, I was one of the founders of and the CTO at Denim Group, and with the acquisition of Denim Group in June of last year, now I'm the Vice President of Product Strategy at Coalfire. So from an agenda standpoint, I want to talk a little bit about the Log4j background, but honestly, the other talks tonight, I think, probably provide better insights. What I'm going to look more at is how do I think that these Log4j vulnerabilities are going to impact organizations that are producing software as well as organizations that are consuming software. And I think that's actually really interesting. Looking at both sides of that coin, because honestly, for all the talk we've had in the application security space about how it's important to do security early and why it's really valuable, it's the right thing to do, a lot of those arguments are good hygiene arguments. And it's not that they're invalid, but they haven't on their own been successful in changing the behaviors within industry. But where I have seen behavior changes are situations where software consumers, the people with money, go to their vendors and say, security is now something that you have to do, otherwise we will hold up, we won't buy your software, or we won't go through this upgrade. And they're using essentially the power of the money as consumers to shape the behavior of their vendors. And if you spread that across the entire industry, then all of a sudden everyone has to get better. And so that's, again, one of the biggest changes that I've seen versus a lot of the early talk about, let's build security in and it's the right thing to do. Again, all valid arguments. We want to look at what changes behavior. It is pain. And I think what we, certainly something to get from the previous talk was the pain that these Log4j vulnerabilities and their remediation caused to organizations. And so I want to look at the behavior changes that I think will come out of that. And along the way, I also want to highlight a number of what I think to be really valuable resources that OWASP provides that can help software producers and software consumers in dealing with what I see as being these upcoming trends. And so we're specifically going to look at software bills of materials, the choices of whether to upgrade or remove components, as well as vendor management and the questionnaires that are associated with those. And again, please submit questions via the YouTube. Happy to answer anywhere I can. So this was the beginning at my organization. This is the beginning. I get up early, work out, feed the dogs, get cleaned up, sit down at my workstation, and I was looking through Twitter and noticed this blog post about the Log4Shell vulnerability, and notified the team. I was like, hey gang, I expect that we're going to get a couple questions about this, so be prepared. And as you see, one of my colleagues replied, hey, that would explain some of the InfoSec memes I've seen this morning on Twitter. And I also have to compliment Rick and Anna. They had an excellent collection of Log4Shell or Log4j memes. And so this really kicked off the saga in our organization. We're both a producer of software, a consumer of software, and act as application security consultants. This was kind of the beginning of all of it, and I can see at least a short way into the future. And I said, hey y'all, we are going to have to spend. This is going to consume some of our time, in the coming days. As it turns out, I was right. Again, for background, the other presentations from today are probably much better at looking at some of the technical details, some of the and some of the short-term impact. I'd also recommend people look at Matt Conda, who is I believe a former at this point now OWASP board member, longtime board contributor. He has put up a really valuable blog post with link to some slides and some video that talk about the underlying issues with that the Log4Shell vulnerability identified. So for those technical details, there's other resources that I think are going to be more valuable. What I want to look at again is the short-term impacts. When we look at Owen and what he's going to be talking about, how this ruined Christmas. Somehow this happens every year. There's every year there's some sort of ridiculous breach or vulnerability that ties people up. And again, what we saw was, or what I saw both in our organization as well as in the organizations where we act as an advisor on application security, a lot of scrambling. What applications do we have that are using Log4j? Which of them are potentially exploitable? How do we upgrade these to a non-exploitable version? But that first question begs another broader question, which is, wait a minute, everyone, what do we have an inventory of all the applications that we have just in general? Do we know all of the stuff that we have? Do we understand our attack surface? And so that's kind of a first thing is a lot of organizations didn't have, it was impossible for them to start out in a structured way addressing this because they didn't have a good view of what their organization's attack surface looked like. Again, at Coalfire, we have a managed attack surface, management service that can talk about that elsewhere. But from an OWASP standpoint, a really fantastic resource that OWASP has in starting to help organizations answer that question is the AMAS project. And so that helps to do this attack surface detection and management. What applications do I have? And so it has a number of ways that it goes through and looks at DNS records and URL crawling and things like that, guessing subdomains and a variety of other approaches. But OWASP AMAS is a really, really impressive project. Again, OWASP freely available that can help you as an organization start to get an understanding of what are all the applications that we have hanging off of our attack surface, right? So really, really great resource and recommend people take a look at that. Then once you find applications asking which are vulnerable, another OWASP project I'd like to highlight is the OWASP ZAP project. It is a web proxy, great for web app penetration testing, API testing, as well as an automated DAST scanner. Has a great API, very automatable. So just in general, a great security tool, freely available to organizations. And they've got some resources that they've published, looking at how is ZAP related to Log4Shell and how can you use ZAP potentially to detect if applications are vulnerable to Log4Shell. So again, as you try to answer these questions, right now with Log4Shell, but in general, the next time something horrible happens and ruins your Christmas, these are some resources that are available to help you, identify your attack surface, as well as vulnerability to Log4Shell or potentially whatever the next Log4Shell vulnerability is. Now, if we look at what are these, how is this going to play out forward in the industry? And I don't necessarily think that that my suggestions here are anything earth-shattering, because really what they're doing, or what I believe is going to happen, is these are going to they're going to really accelerate some previously emerging trends, and they're going to bring those more to the forefront. And I'll talk about some other pressures in the industry that I see that are, again, pushing these types of things forward. As I mentioned, organizations change behavior, organisms, things change their behavior based on pain and discomfort. Hopefully organizations will take some of the lessons learned from the pain from Log4j and use that to project forward to make the next one of these less painful. Right. And so the areas we're going to talk about, again, looking at software bills of materials, choices of whether or not to upgrade or remove components, and vendor management. And this talk is essentially a talk version of a blog post that I have, and there's a link to that out and available on the web. And so, a software bill of materials, right? And I look at this as literally the least we can do as an industry, right? And so what a software bill of materials is, just like a normal bill of materials, if you have some sort of manufactured product, it's going to say you need 4 wheels of this spec, 4 of these bolts, 8 of these washers, nuts. It's basically the list. What are the components that go up into building this manufactured product? When you translate that to software, it's a question of what are the software components, especially typically focused on open source components. What components have I included in this software, and what versions of those components am I using? Right. So it's a list of, for a given piece of software, this is everything that got pulled in to this build of the software. And I really view being able to articulate what is in the software you have people deploy is like literally the least that we can do. Right. And it's something that we've seen from sophisticated consumers for a number of years, right? Especially in the banking and the financial services sector. Again, the folks that tend to have more mature application security programs, this is something that they've been concerned about for years. And so we get requests, hey, for this release, we need to know all the open source components and their versions. Everybody is willing to typically accept those in a Microsoft Excel sheet. I'm sure that those Excel sheets at this point are subject to tremendous scrutiny. I'm sure people are reading exhaustively through them. And I'll talk again about some ways I think that'll change here going forward. And these are typically pretty easy to generate if you have a software composition analysis tool that you're running, or again, there's utilities for a lot of Maven and other build packages that make it fairly easy to generate these things. Also, another area where that has kind of brought software bills of materials into the conversation is the Biden administration, the U.S. Biden administration's executive order on improving the nation's cybersecurity. They also mentioned software bills of materials, and something that I'm certainly paying attention to with great interest is to see if we look at how the U.S. federal government changes the way that they develop software and purchase software, how is that going to flow out to the U.S. private sector, and and how is that then going to flow out into the rest of the world? I think that for almost every software company, the U.S. federal government is a very attractive potential customer, and so I will be really interested to see how this moves the needle in the more broad application security landscape. And when I look at software bills of materials being literally the least we can do, it reminds me of, and I don't know how many of you all, again, in the Netherlands are familiar with Van Halen. I'm not sure how much U.S. culture makes its way over there, probably more than should. But there is a long-lasting story about Van Halen where they had a writer for their concerts, for their contract writer for their concerts, that said they needed a bowl in the green room. They needed a bowl of M&Ms with all the brown ones removed, right? And I think this was often perceived as being these rock bands doing crazy stuff, right? Just making bizarre requests. But really, what they used that as was a checksum or a shibboleth, right? Because this was a really large touring show. They had a lot of requirements for the weight that floors could support, for doorway sizes and things like that. And if the concert venue and the crew associated with this couldn't be bothered or hadn't looked at the contract writer in sufficient detail to know that they shouldn't have brown M&Ms in the bowl of M&Ms, that's a likely indicator of other problems, right? And so when I look at this, if you go to a software vendor and they either can't or won't produce a software bill of material, that's a canary in the coal mine. That would lead me to ask, well, what else is all screwed up in this organization in the way that they produce software? And so that's something where if you're a software producer, so looking at this from the producer side, expect increasing requests for software bills of materials, right? As I said, we've seen that from the forward-leading sectors for a long time. Expect that to make its way more broadly across the industry. As I said before, I think a lot of organizations get those software bills of materials and file them away in somewhere to be consulted. Never. I would also start to expect increasing scrutiny on the contents of these software bills of materials. And so you're going to want to proactively augment your tooling and your development practices, right? So when the first customer comes and asks for a software bill of material, again, it's one thing, the technical tooling is usually pretty straightforward, assuming you have a reasonably modern tool set. That's pretty straightforward. But what is the process that your organization goes through in order to get that artifact created and blessed? And another thing to think about is from a legal or regulatory standpoint, who do you have to go ask in the organization? Do I have the ability to take this document that probably has information considered to be confidential and to provide that to a consumer? If you have already gone through this process, you're going to look a lot more polished, to your software consumers than if this, when this request comes in, it creates a log4j like fire drill to go and address these issues, right? So this is something, if you're a producer of software, expect to start producing this and go through what does that entire process look like from producing it for a recent build and actually transmitting it. Understand that, and you're going to look like you have, like you're a lot more squared away. For software consumers, I think you certainly need to start asking for software bills of materials. Right? Again, the more people that do this, the more this is going to become a common practice, and everyone around the industry is going to start adopting this, which I think has a lot of value. But I think you also need to look at what sort of tooling are you deploying in order to manage these bills of materials and monitor their status? And you need to have practices in place to deal with these alerts. It's only the beginning of the process to collect these software bills of materials. What are you actually going to do with them and how are you going to use them? Or you just have those stored in a folder somewhere to use, for litigation support later on, right? If you really want to impact your security, you can't just collect them. You've also got to have the infrastructure around them to manage them and to take action. From an OWASP standpoint, there are two projects that are really valuable and they're related. There's the Cyclone DX project, which is a standardized data format. One of the, I think there's about 3 of them that are reasonably prominent right now. But Cyclone DX seeing really great adoption. And the OWASP Dependency Track project. And this is a platform not to be confused with Dependency Check, which is a software composition analysis tool. So these are related, but Dependency Track is for managing software bills of materials across the application portfolio, tracking new CVEs as they arrive, and alerting when you have software that may now be known to have vulnerable components. These are both projects run by Steve Springett, again, longtime OWASP contributor. They are fantastic. Worked with them, really enjoy these, and great freely available resources that you can use in your organization to get started. So moving on. Another thing that we've seen both in discussions that I've had with customers of ours as well as advisory customers of ours, a challenge with software composition analysis tools is that they have traditionally, they flag the presence of vulnerable versions of components, right? And so you have the Apache HTTP utility library XYZ that's known to have a denial of service vulnerability. That's great to know that you've pulled that component in, but that level of analysis flags a lot of potential non-issues. And it can be very disruptive if you've got to, for every result that comes out of this tool, look and determine, well, hey, do we think that this is actually an issue? Why do we think it is or it isn't? Like that type of analysis is very time consuming. Right. So what we've seen the software composition analysis tool vendors have done, they've started to augment these tools with data and control flow analysis so they can characterize the usage of vulnerable components. And this is great because it can show you, hey, you're pulling in this vulnerable component, but you're not actually ever touching any methods that are associated with this vulnerability. You're using different parts of that component. That's fantastic. Something that we've seen, which is frustrating, is I've had conversations where software consumers don't care, right? They've we've gone and said, hey, we're using this version of the component. It's got known vulnerabilities. We've done our risk assessment, and we don't actually use the vulnerable parts of that component. And the response we get back is, we don't care, right? You either need to upgrade to a known non-vulnerable version, or the component needs to not be in there. That is the standard that we have. And flipping this around, that for a consumer, how much do you really want to trust the analysis that your software producer has done when they have an incentive to say, we looked at this and it's not an issue, right? The same thing, any penetration tester who's ever gone and talked to developers, the first reaction in too many cases is that's not the way it works in production, right? Or that's not an issue, right? Again, as a software consumer, I understand that decision just to say, I don't want to do my own risk analysis. I don't necessarily trust your risk analysis. Show me that you're on a non-vulnerable version, or show me that you've removed the component. So for software producers, you need to prepare to come armed with better data on potential exploitability. Trust us is a less compelling argument than maybe it was before. And what I really hope this does for a lot of software producers is cause them to evaluate, how do you handle technical debt from open source components, right? How long do you wait to do upgrades, especially for point releases that shouldn't have any API changes or compatibility issues? This is a really incredible couple of opportunities for automation. Some of the SCA vendors are now providing automated patches via pull requests or things like that. Your CI/CD pipeline, hopefully most organizations, the critical software is running through pipelines to validate builds. This creates an opportunity with some scripting where you can fix things in the background until something breaks, right? So let's just keep upgrading components to the latest version or to known non-vulnerable versions. Feed that build through the CI/CD pipeline and smoke test it, see if it works, right? Wait, just upgrade everything you can until something breaks. That's the point then where developers need to go in and look at the impact analysis of doing upgrades, right? So I think that's a really exciting opportunity for organizations to use this automation, in order to really revolutionize the way that they handle tech debt, away from let's do quarterly, we're going to move things forward, or on a vulnerability report, then we're going to make a determination. Again, I think those, with the way that tooling is going for organizations, I think there's really cool opportunities for automation here. For software consumers, right? What I would recommend is to be realistic and consistent and clear about what you require and what the standards are that you are expecting to be to. As an aside, but if every organization that buys software is a real jerk about this, that's going to push the industry forward faster, right? And so again, if you as a buyer is causing pain and saying, no, hey, just upgrade this stuff, and you need to show me that you have practices that gets this stuff upgraded on a timely manner, if everybody's a jerk about this, then every organization is going to have to behave better. And so that's we'll see how that works going forward. From an OWASP standpoint, some things that you have available to help you out. There's this concept of vulnerability exploitability exchange. And that's a question of, do these included vulnerable components actually expose the software to exploitation, and being able to express that in a structured way. Cyclone DX has the capability to take these documents and look at software bills of materials and munge those together in order to determine that. So there are ways to, in a structured manner, communicate some of these potential exploitability. Again, if you're a software producer, good luck getting people to trust that. Finally, looking at questionnaires, vendor management questionnaires. And this is, vendor security management has been a thing for a while, and questionnaires are primarily the tool of the trade, right? I think that these are going to get rough, right? And I've seen this myself, right? I think they're going to have greater scope. There's going to be more topic areas, including looking at application security practices, not just data management practices and other kind of more standard, information security stuff. And they're going to get more invasive and specific with questions, right? I made the mistake of, I have a saying with some of my friends that no good deed goes unpunished. Like, the world is undefeated in punishing every good deed that you ever do. We had a vendor management questionnaire that was languishing. And I volunteered to help because I had some extra time. Well, the reason it was languishing because it was huge and super in depth. And so I stepped up and said, hey, I'll help out with that, guys. And instantly regretted it because it was, like a 4-tab spreadsheet with hundreds of items that really went into very specific detail about the organization's practices, right? And so it was a real bear to go and sort out. So if you're a software producer, you need to build a library of answers that can be reused and repurposed, right? And this is something where it really pays to have a regular cadence of updating and maintaining, on a structured way. Let us know when things change so that when we get new questionnaires, we can go and rely on a lot of things that have already been produced in order to answer those questions, and the information is up to date. I would also just caution everyone, we also have a saying that business lying is fraud. And so you have to be truthful in responding into how you actually enact these various procedures. That's very important, should go without saying. But again, business lying is fraud. For software consumers, the request I have here is to rely on standardization wherever possible, right? Your organization, I'm sure, does wonderful work in the world, but at the end of the day, you're not a special snowflake. You have a risk profile that is going to be similar to other organizations. And if you can standardize, that's going to make the process more efficient all around of getting people to answer questionnaires, to generate answers, as well as for you to evaluate. And I'd also recommend to be very clear on your criteria in your decision-making process. I've seen a lot of questionnaires that have that overreach, or that say all these other measures are required, right? And so I think it's important to be clear on what is actually required for different types of software, and which practices are a nice to do, or what is your risk budget. Because if everything on the questionnaire is the most important and you require an over-the-top answer, if everything's important, then nothing is important, and you're going to get data that is probably not going to be helpful in evaluating risk, because it's going to obfuscate what the actual practice is, or you're just going to get outright lies. And so for software consumers, it's tempting to really crank down these questionnaires and make them huge and set a very high bar. I think you need to be realistic in what you're asking for if you want to get data that you can actually use to make decisions. OWASP, again, has 2 great resources here to help. The OWASP Software Assurance Maturity Model, that's a very structured way at looking at how mature are the application security practices for a product team, right? And so, and it's a structured way. You could also look at the BSIM in the same way, but it's looking at, if you're asking an organization about their practices, you can pin to this standard that you can point toward and say, well, hey, we use OWASP SAM. Here's the level of maturity we have in each of these different business practices. Similarly, the OWASP ASVS is the application security verification standard. And so that lets you speak in a structured and standardized way what level of security inspection has been performed on a specific release of software, and what vulnerabilities, or what are the character of vulnerabilities that were identified. Again, much better than using OWASP Top 10 as a standard. That's a risk education document, not a standard. The OWASP ASVS is a standard. So you can say, hey, we've evaluated a software at this level of ASVS, and we found, 1 critical, 2 highs, and 3 mediums. We remediated the criticals and highs, and the mediums are going to be addressed in the next release. Whatever that might be. It lets you speak in a structured way, or ask questions in a structured way. And again, what we want to see is, or what I think is best for the industry, is tying back to these sorts of standard documents so that everyone has a common language to talk about this. That's going to make it much easier for organizations to meet these bars. There's some other resources out there. I spoke at the Black Hat CISO forum last year, looking at supply chain security, but through the lens of CI/CD pipelines, and speaking at RSA this year on kind of an evolved version of that perspective. Again, I think I've got a couple minutes left here. I'd love to answer any questions that people have.
All right, then thank you for your presentation. The question screen should appear shortly on YouTube as well, of course, slightly before I start talking. So if anybody has any questions, please put them in the chat. and we will relay them to Dan. Otherwise, in about 5 minutes, we'll start with the next presentation, and that is by Owen Pendlebury, again, on how Log4j ruined our Christmas. One. Welcome back, everybody, to the third and final presentation of this OWASP Netherlands chapter meeting. The topic by Owen Pendlebury is how Log4j ruined our Christmas. Owen, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know whether the slides went a bit funny there, but not sure why. Thank you to, I guess, Rick, Anna, and Dan. There's a lot of things that I potentially don't have to go through now. During my talk, it's interesting that we're all talking about the same topic 3 in a row. So lots of different perspectives. I think you might have YouTube on in the background. Somebody's not muted. Okay. Sorry, guys. I think one of you are. Yeah, there we go. I was hearing myself. So I guess yeah. So my topic is how Log4j ruined Christmas. I did want to put a lot of Christmas gifts and all that kind of stuff in, but time ran away from me, and unfortunately, I'm stuck with just a normal template. But hopefully, the actual content will cover that off. So just to move on. So who am I? So I'm head of cyber resilience at Bank of Ireland, obviously in Ireland. So I lead out security incident response, security testing, and threat intelligence for the bank. Also a former global board of director member. So I held the role of chair, vice chair, and secretary within OWASP for the last 4 years. Over the last 4 years, and also a lecturer, and created a few master's degrees and diplomas in cybersecurity. So I'd like to give back to the community and make sure that the community is learning what the industry actually is looking for. So we've heard we've heard from the previous speakers a lot about what is on this slide, but I guess the key things here are that so there was 3 CVSS scores that came out from 3 different vulnerabilities, 10, 9, and 6. So the 6 was in relation to a denial of service attack, so which could only be exploited from an internal attacker. So you'd require somebody that was already on your network in order to exploit it. Whereas the 9 and 10 were externally exploitable through a deserialization vulnerability. So within the first 24 hours, the vulnerability had a number of exploits circulating across the web, especially on GitHub. This actually made it pretty useful for, say, the likes of myself and my team, because with those exploits coming out, we were able to, I guess, validate our external perimeter using similar exploits to what the attackers were using. And the fact that I guess that this was something that affected pretty much nearly every technology on the internet all over the world, many software applications, many applications that you probably don't already know about. It's widely considered to be the most serious security vulnerability encountered in recent times. So I guess when we're looking at it, we're looking at obviously 2.x. 1.x was mentioned earlier on. There are remote code execution vulnerabilities in 1.x. A lot of people have moved away from it, but there are still organizations that have to utilize 1.x based on the fact that they're using legacy systems. 2.x, yeah, I guess there's multiple different versions. There was multiple different I guess exploits against different point in time versions, and then I guess when the vulnerability was patched, the big pain was that as I think Rick mentioned earlier on, the vulnerability there was a patch, and then a day later there was another patch, and then a day later there was another patch. And the issue there was that when you're like in organizations that have maybe 1,500, 10,000 applications, you have a lot to go through to identify whether it is vulnerable, whether you are at risk from this. So just to call out, I guess a few news articles, and some of them are like long live log4shell. It's not dead yet, and that's because there is a long tail on this particular vulnerability, based on the fact that even to date there are a number of software packages that haven't released patches for it, and they're some of the biggest software packages in the world, widely utilized by organizations all over the world. So like I guess UK companies face fine if you don't patch log4j vulnerability. That's a big call in my eyes, based on the fact that there are a number of different other vulnerabilities that are out there that organizations are vulnerable to, but they're not being fined by that. So for those, but there are a number of different news articles, including Dutch cybersecurity agency warns lingering log4j. As I mentioned, it is one of those vulnerabilities that's going to last a long time with a long tail on it. And now, like, it is kind of the gift that keeps on giving, given the looking at the Christmas theme, with the 1.x vulnerability. I don't talk about it here in the slides, but I'll give a quick overview. So 1.x, it is externally exploitable to a deserialization vulnerability, but only if you use a log viewer called Chainsaw, which is a package that is part of log4j 1.x, but it's only if you have it configured and you actually utilize it. That once you view a log with a serialized message in it, that it will deserialize and execute the payload. But back to 2.x. So one of the things that I don't think we talked about today was the actual attack itself. And I come from an attack background, having spent 11 years in pen testing and red teaming. So I guess just to give a quick overview, and I have noticed as I was looking through my slides that there's 2 number 3s. So that's going to annoy me now. So the first, from an attacker's perspective, what they would do is they would send a GET request with a payload, payload in the request. It didn't really matter where it was injected into, based on the fact that the majority of say applications and the logs that are coming from applications, they log say a GET request, post request, including the headers. So in here the payload is injected into the user agent header. A lot of organizations use that to identify whether there's any stability issues with the application based on what users are accessing their sites from. So it's an important thing to log. So as you can see, that payload is then passed to the server with the vulnerable log4j instance, and then log4j very nicely parses that and then queries the malicious LDAP server, as the request is LDAP to evil.com. And then from there, the LDAP server responds with I guess directory information or a payload. And instances, and I'll talk about it later on, there are a number of instances where a payload was then downloaded onto that particular server. I'll go through that in a few minutes. So as I mentioned, so the attacker might say, I guess, when they're trying to exploit this, they set the malicious Java class on the attacker-controlled LDAP server. But then, I guess the lookup function will be used to execute the malicious class on the remote LDAP server. Once that exploit exceeds, depending on the contents of the URL in the lookup, the server then interprets the string. This might then lead to arbitrary shell commands in various forms like Java class, JavaScript, or Unix shell, among others. So once something is executed, what an attacker looks to do is laterally move from the affected server. So it was observed in the wild that using Cobalt Strike components that are normally used for lateral movement, that they were downloaded onto victim machines. And I will talk about the affected industries in a couple of slides. So these can be then used for lateral movement and might lead to a possible ransomware infection. As say the Cobalt Strike components have been observed for variety of ransomware attacks. It's generally the tool of choice when an attacker is trying to exploit an individual. And then you would move on to, say, credential access. And once you gain a set of credentials, attempt to laterally move across the network and keep on going until you get an account with elevated privileges, or you are able to exploit a vulnerability on the internal network that gives you those elevated privileges. And then it's all about trophy gathering at that point. And just sorry, my keyboard doesn't seem to be working. So from the attack itself, so within the first 12 hours, the vulnerability was detected. 40,000 attempts at exploiting Log4j. Now, these were all spray and pray attacks based on what I said earlier on. The exploit code and POCs were on GitHub, so everybody was trying it against a number of organizations. So the 40,000 then grew to 120,000 within 24 hours of the detection. By the 36-hour mark, there had been 400,000 attempts using the Log4j vulnerability. The rate of attacks then steadily climbed from this point, reaching a peak of 830,000 at the 72-hour mark. So as you can see, so the vulnerability was released, and then there was a significant amount of attacks as a result. So the increasing rate of attack as time progressed could have a number of underlying causes based on the fact that many organizations are being attacked, and if they don't have the correct tooling in place, they may not know that they were attacked. Is the issue. So, and I guess every organization seen there was a lot of spray and pray attacks. A lot of those attacks were actually coming from Tor exit nodes. So looking at the Tor, so the actual official Tor website, the Onion project, and you can actually get a list of, I think, 1,600, 1,700 official exit nodes. Now there are like potentially 10,000 exit nodes, but from an official exit node perspective, one of the mitigations was would have been to block those, because like I think we seen 80% of the spray and pray attacks for this vulnerability were coming from those exit nodes. So luckily enough, we utilize network monitoring tools on our DMZ, so we can analyze and trace that kind of traffic in the event that we need to forensically analyze whether, say, somebody has attacked us, where it went, and so on. So that's a good control to put in place. So on this slide, you can see the attacks by industry and attacks by device type. So Log4j was exploited across a wide variety of sectors. To be honest, it didn't really matter to the sector. I think it was just a number of chancers, spray and praise. If they were able to exploit it, what could they do? What benefit could they get? Financial services was by far the biggest hit, making up nearly a third of the affected industries. So it illustrates clearly how attackers prioritize financial services and institutions in their attempts to exploit Log4j. But saying that, as I mentioned, like given the wide variety of industries, it was literally just who can I affect and what can I get from an attacker's standpoint. By device, so you can see there virtual machines were one of the biggest, and that's based on the fact that Java is widely used in virtual machines. You can also see a number of different devices there, all very heavy on from a Java perspective. And in nearly half the cases, computer servers were, say, target of the attacks. The attackers exploited not just servers, but cameras, network access points, gateways, etc. So, like, there's a wide variety of attacks. Going back to the point where it was just, and I've seen it on our external perimeter. A significant amount of spray and pray and automated attacks, which if something was exploited, then obviously an attacker will zone in and on that particular vulnerable server or device. So going back to, I guess, the chain of attacks and what the mitigations are for mitigating against the Log4j, Log4Shell vulnerability. So the first one, disable Log4j library. So disabling the software obviously is the most effective measure, but as we heard in the first talk, even rolling back the version of Log4j caused logging to stop working. So by disabling or even changing anything, there's a lot of regression testing and back to my point where organizations, they not only have, say, 5-10 applications where it might be quite easy to get a handle of. There's just thousands and thousands of applications in some organizations, and to disable on all those applications is a huge task while maintaining service, because as you know, financial services is highly regulated, so any downtime is there's a potential fine. So disabling the GINDI lookups or disabling raw code bases. So this option, while effective, may involve developer work and could impact functionality. So again, lots of regression testing, and given the amount of attacks that were going on within a short space of time, it's not really a viable option. Disconnect affected stacks, so solution stacks not connected to networks pose a dramatic lower risk from an attack. So it could be considered to temporarily disable those from third parties that were affected, but a lot of organizations utilize third parties in a significant manner. Isolate the system, so create a vulnerable network VLAN. So yes, it's vulnerable, but if you're exploited in a VLAN and don't actually implement the correct ACLs and on that VLAN, then somebody that is able to exploit this can then naturally move across the network, and it's only a matter of time before they're able to exploit something. So something that came out quick but not so quick were WAF rules for this. And then you get into the realm of, is the WAF configured correctly? So from my consulting background, I've seen a lot of clients where WAF was never configured to block. It was only configured in monitor mode or a passive mode, so that it didn't affect the normal workings of the application. In most instances, this was the case. So therefore, even though WAF rules come out, something that's not in blocking mode means that you can only tell whether there's that attack pattern being executed against your applications. And then there were several micro patches, but as was discussed earlier on, those micro patches, like it resulted in countless number of wasted man hours in the remediation efforts when they just had to start from scratch. So a lot of what happened over the whole Christmas period was that a lot of people were already tired, as discussed in the first talk, from quite a busy year, and then their year got extended. No holidays for a lot of people, based on the fact that there was such a significant issue or potential issue to organizations. So going on to the problem and what we face now. So as you can see in the article from the Wall Street Journal, so 2 months on, many developers are still downloading the flawed Log4j tool. So whether this be to development environments or whether they're committing to production, they're looking at vulnerable, or they're downloading vulnerable software and then bringing it into production potentially, and thus causing a potential impact to the organization. So as I mentioned, organizations can have thousands and thousands of applications, but not only that, but the Log4j vulnerability affected software. So who has an asset of all software? As Dan mentioned, SBOMs, understanding how the stack of how your software is built. Who has an asset, who has an inventory of all applications when different departments within an organization go out and potentially have applications from hosted on third parties that are technically owned by you, but you don't have an understanding of those. How do you find it, first of all? So a lot of people, and I've seen it in many organizations, they relied on vulnerability scanning tools. But to rely on vulnerability scanning tools, you have to rely on them releasing a signature for that particular vulnerability. So without the SBOM, you don't know what you have on your estate. Tools like Qualys, Nessus, they release signatures for these particular issues. Then once you have the signature, you need to scan your entire estate. So in most instances, the vulnerability resulted in, say for instance, it was exploitable. So tools like Qualys could actually simulate an attacker and call back to one of their servers and tell you that you are vulnerable. There were other QIDs that were identified one instance of say Log4j based on processes or services that were listening on ports. But what happens if that kind of thing happens if you do an unauthenticated scan? If you do an authenticated scan, then you have a lot more information from registry and program files and stuff like that. But again, it's signature based. So at those early points, none of us knew the extent of this, of the vulnerability. Yes, in all Java, but as there isn't the SBOM, you weren't aware of your vendors, third-party software on your estate that were potentially impacted by this. And then based on the fact that you are reliant on signatures to identify something, the signatures didn't identify everything. There are other vulnerable software packages out there that there are signatures for still. So do you script things like, I've heard of organizations where they've had maybe, say, 1,000 vulnerable instances, which were identified by one of these vulnerability management tools. And then when they actually looked at it over the entire estate, they found tens of thousands of instances of Log4j of the jar on their estate. But so going down a rabbit hole, tens of thousands, are they actually impactful? Not all of them are impactful, and therefore looking at the two CVEs there at the bottom that are related to remote code execution, the 9 and the 10, they're the ones that should be focused on. So without going down the rabbit hole of trying to fix every single piece of software on your estate, looking at the actual vulnerable versions of the software and fixing those are probably the best approach to this, to fixing the problem. So there were also a few quickish fixes. So for different versions of log4j, there was like disable the lookups, but that proved to be bypassed fairly quickly. So a lot of organizations, their strategy was to apply the mitigations based on the fact that the mitigation was just disable this lookup, and then you don't have to do any regression testing. So not all organizations had the misfortune of going through that, but it's something that, as it was easily exploitable, or found to be exploitable, it was a waste of time. For all 2.x versions, there was removing the vulnerable class, and there's a script there that could be run against every server to remove that class, based on the fact that it's in a particular directory on the application server. So that was something that was proven to be a quick fix, but not knowing where the software was, it was kind of like an internal spray and pray for most organizations. So things that you can do that I certainly found very useful was that evaluating the external perimeter. As I mentioned earlier on, there was a number of POCs and that were released on the external perimeter on GitHub. And so as you can see here on the right hand side, so it's possible to utilize tools like Burp, Zap, in order to see whether an application can be injected into, by injecting it to headers, and see whether you get a call back to an external service. So apply and monitor IOCs. So something that I don't think anybody mentioned, but from a security point of view, there was a significant amount of IOCs that were out there. So IOCs are pieces of forensic information, indicators of compromise, that are released online. And the challenge with IOCs is that in most cases you find that there's legitimate software or applications that are added, or IPs that are added, which could potentially cause impact to service. But in other cases, the IOCs could be the IPs of servers that have tried to exploit other organizations, so therefore blocking them are useful. It's useful, but if you just recycle your IP, you can just go again. So you end up with a significant amount of IOCs being blocked on your gateway. In relation to IOCs, I mentioned network monitoring. So applying those IOCs to a network monitoring tool at your in your DMZ is something very useful and important to look at, based on the fact that you can see that a particular external IP has connected to an application and injected the attack vector, and you can actually track the flow of that vector, and whether there's a server downstream that does actually respond to that attack vector. So it's quite useful. I mentioned earlier on about blocking Tor nodes. So there is the 9000 unofficial, but if you were to block the 9000 unofficial, based on IP cycling and stuff like that, then you can't be guaranteed that you're not going to block a legitimate site, and could cause the service impact that I mentioned. It's important to continue to monitor the log4j assets closely. So as I mentioned, it's a long tail. Some organizations have thousands and thousands of applications that need to be patched. And with that, it's not something that's going to happen very quickly. So it's important to utilize, say, your monitoring capability within your organization to monitor those assets, and then monitor and look for malicious activity based on the exploit strings. It is also important to note that many application servers, even though you obfuscate something, the application server will be obfuscated because application servers are work that way, and then can still exploit it. So it's not about just looking for the initial attack vector, but variants of it, which is why looking at the IOCs are important. So an important thing and a lesson learned, I guess, throughout this whole incident was that, so yes, you could look on Twitter, you could look on Reddit, numerous number of locations, but the most important place to look was the official Apache website that referenced the Log4j vulnerabilities, and whether there were what the mitigation steps were, what patches were available. The only thing that it didn't note fairly quickly was that different versions were vulnerable, which is why looking at different sources and having access to different sources is important. So also like blocking specific outbound network traffic. So outbound LDAP, who uses outbound LDAP? So unless you're in a hybrid cloud approach, which you could be, LDAP may never be used. So evaluating that, blocking it is a very quick and easy fix. Same way with remote method invocation and outbound DNS. So most organizations, they use an internal DNS server, so there should be no calls out to an external DNS server. That and the accumulation of IOCs from the last number of big attacks, blocking those is very useful in stemming this kind of attack. We mentioned, or S-bombs were mentioned a lot, but I won't labor them. But good security posture is very, very important. So in order to successfully exploit Log4j vulnerability, the attacker must be able to instruct the vulnerable host to download Java classes from a host they control, so an external host. That means that they need to be able to establish the connection outside of the organization, and that the victim machine downloads those classes or the attack vector. This is where normal or good old network security practices come in. So why would you allow a server in your network to open an outbound LDAP connection to the internet? So local firewalls on those servers, or even on your external firewall, blocking outbound connections from an LDAP perspective is very important. So understanding the attack paths and threat models. So the most intriguing thing about the Log4j vulnerability is that the ways in which it can be exploited are only limited to the imagination and the expertise of the attacker. So these examples using common HTTP headers were used because it's very common that applications write those headers to the logs, writing the received content in logs, which is then triggers the vulnerability. But virtually any application input could be the exploit. Detection must go beyond the first exploit. So it needs to go to blue teams. Security vendors were quick to respond with signatures, policies, and rule-based detections, and to block the first reserved attacks. However, what we saw was that a series of quick actions to create content designed to detect those specific attacks only. Although the content would certainly help you to see that those attempts against your environment, they were focused on static indicators or compromise, and in attacks using different or even slightly different vectors were very efficient and were likely to be missed by your detection capabilities. Like Dan, I've added a lot of useful content. Unfortunately, I didn't add the OWASP links, but there are a number of different useful resources on this page, and just going back to it, there are multiple sources. Not all the sources are very useful. There's some very technical sources which, when putting this slide deck together, were very useful to me. But it's about understanding the issue, understanding your environment, and then understanding how to fix it, and the plan, and putting a plan in place to actually fix it. And like many, the remediation efforts of this are going to go on for a long period of time. But as I mentioned, the most important thing is to patch or remove vulnerabilities that are the 9s and 10s, which can be externally exploitable. So once they're patched, or if they're segregated in some way, or if you block LDAP requests going out, those kind of things, just in order to apply mitigation and add that layer of depth into your defense process. And with that, I'll take any questions. Hopefully I didn't go over too much that the others talked about, but always available to take any questions, and either on this or outside of this.
All right, thank you, Owen, for this presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, if you have any questions, please let us know. Use the chat. That's what it is for. Either way, Owen, thank you for your presentation. And of course, Anna, Rick, and Dan as well. Thank you all. We will make the presentations. Well, the presentation will remain available as a whole on this channel and will be published later on as
Hopefully,
well.
I didn't just talk for the last 40 minutes when nobody can hear me. I'm not hearing anybody. If anybody's talking.
Oh.
I think we're just listening.
No, I was on mute as well.
Well, I'm finished, so it got a good bit uncomfortable there with nobody talking.
Yeah, didn't want to jump in on the live thing.
Yeah, okay, so apparently I was muted twice. Sorry for that. Now, that concludes our meeting for today. Thank you all for watching. We'll have another chapter meeting probably in March. Again, we'll try to hold it at the third Thursday of March. That's a tongue twister. And we'll keep you updated on whether or not it's online or even physical if measures allow. So thank you all for watching for today. And Owen, Anna, Rick, and Dan, of course, thank you for presenting. Have a nice day, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you. Have a nice evening, everyone.